Hello folks, this is Johnny again, and welcome to my review of Overloud's Amp Simulator TH3. Now, first of all, this is not a sponsored review. I bought this thing at the full price. I didn't get a discount, although it's not like I didn't try. And I'm also not getting anything else out of this review. So this comes out of my own volition. The reason I say this is because I'm so amazed at this thing. I'm pretty sure my fanboy will show throughout the review, but I'll try to be as objective as possible. And just so we are clear, my reactions are not exaggerated. They are pretty honest. And with that said, also let's make it official. I switched to TH3 now, so I'm not using the Pod HD Pro anymore for my tones. And you already heard the TH3 tones in our Blink-182 cover, and you can check that out right here. Now, without further ado, let's get into some tone demos. First metal tone, and then a djenty style, and then a clean tone, all one after the other. So enjoy the next 3 minutes, and then we'll get into it. Alright, now if I didn't know that was done with an amp simulation, I would almost say that was done with real amps. But just to be clear, I don't have any real life first-hand experience with real tube amps. All I have to go off of are the different bands that I listen to, using real amps, using amp modelers, and also watching comparisons and reviews on YouTube, and judging from that, from what my ear can tell, TH3 sounds and feels very close to the real thing. Also, when you play with it yourself, it feels quite different than, at least to me, than any other amp modeler I've tried so far. The one thing I can compare it to the best is the Pod HD Pro, because I've used that for years now. I know how it feels, I know how it reacts, I know how it sounds, I know its flaws, I know its strengths. And in comparison, the Pod feels more flat in its response and its reaction and the way it distorts. A little bit more lifeless and a little bit undefined in the lower range, especially on high gain amp models. The lower range tends to be very foggy and just one constant rumble that doesn't really have any kind of real note definition to it. TH3 is pretty much exactly the opposite. It feels very organic, it's very lively, and it also has some real note definition in the whole lower range. It's not just one constant foggy rumble, it's really defined. And TH3 also doesn't have this constant foggy scratch noise going on that we don't like in amp modeling. So it's really, from what I can tell, this feels very real. Of course, again, take that statement with a grain of salt. I don't have any real hand experience, but it's what I would expect real tube amps to feel like. So on the amp modeling side, this thing is just incredible. It does everything right. That alone is already worth the price. Now let's get into some show and tell. I got it right here. First of all, some specs. It comes as standalone, so you can just jam with it, and also as a plugin, of course. And it has 69 guitar amps in here, and 3 bass amps, and then 35 guitar caps, and 2 bass caps, and also one special one. This bottom one, Cabinet IR, is basically just an impulse loader. So it doesn't limit you to just the caps that it has. And then also another 75 pedal and rack effects, all kinds of stuff, anything you want. And this is pretty rad. In my opinion, from an engineer's viewpoint, I really like having that great variety. So I'm pretty much set for any kind of possible situation. And then here on the left-hand side, you got the presets, the banks, and the individual presets down here. Just click it away, and then here you just saw the components. Very simple, you don't need to explain anything. What's also cool is you have the signal chain in small down here, so you can just click in here and it jumps to that section. Very easy to use, it looks very slick. Of course it sounds great, that's the most important thing, and it does that right, but it also does everything else around it right. Very simple drag and drop concept. And you're also not limited in any way. You can put the signal chain however you want. Nothing is fixed. Also, amps and caps are separated. You can do whatever you want. And you're really not limited to any fixed number of building blocks. Really, the only limitation you have is your CPU power. But we'll get to that also in a little bit. And then you also have a signal splitter. Then you have a top path and a bottom path, and you can do, again, whatever you want. So yeah, pretty much limitless, that thing. Then let's talk about the amps in here. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward. There are no extra deep amp settings, and I personally, I'm all for it. Really, the deep amp settings from the Pod HD, for example, they didn't really affect the tone in a way that I would in the end actually use those settings. Bottom line, I always kept it at default settings, and a couple of other features that I would like to have weren't there. In TH3, they really thought things through. So with the amp, you just get the knobs that you actually need. And any deep amp settings that are not that important, they just leave out. It's very straightforward, to the point. I like it. And then we'll get to the cabs in a bit. The cabs have a lot of options that actually do make sense because those have a real effect on the tone and on the sound. But let's stick to the amps for now. Also again, with the amps, what's cool is depending on what amp model you're using, you also get more knobs and buttons or less knobs and buttons depending on the real amp. So they kept it rather close to the real deal. They don't force any extra stuff onto it that... What in the... Shut up! They don't force any extra stuff that aren't there on the real amps, and they don't leave anything out that may be paramount to the real amps. So this is pretty cool. Also, all the knobs you see in here, they react in a way that you would expect. Let's just check it out, fiddle around with it a little bit. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's the PV5150 model, by the way. They called it Heavy 51, straight and simple. It sounds really great. It's one of my go-to amps with this thing. And the difference between volume and level is volume actually takes care of the power amp section of the amplifier. So you do get a bit more drive, a bit more girth when you dial that up. And level is just simple decibels. You don't change anything to the tone, just the actual output volume. So you can compensate for whatever you're doing with the volume knob. Okay, that's it for the amp. Let's go to the cab. Zoom in a little bit. First of all, what I notice is the cabs can easily hold up against third-party commercial impulse responses. They sound a bit more on the raw side, so they do need a bit more post EQ, but I personally find that gives you a level of tweakability and more options for individuality. Then also the mic you can place however you want, literally wherever you want. And also with the right mouse click you can change the distance. Now the way the sound changes depending on the mic placement is not as detailed perhaps as some audio simulators do, but it's still very well done. It still gives you great variety and you can really tweak your tone however you want. So let's fiddle around with this a little, shall we? Okay, perhaps you noticed, starting at the center position, it sounds a little different depending on what direction you go. In this cab, it might not be that obvious. In other cabs, it is more obvious. I think that's pretty cool. It gives you, again, so much variety, such a great level of tweakability. You can really do however you want it. And also the individual speakers inside one cab can sound slightly different. It's not the case with all cabs in here, but with most of them. And again, with others, it's more obvious, and with some, it's not as obvious. But still, I think it's so cool that they give you so much variety. You can really get your individual tone. It's not the case anymore that you can say, I use this amp, this cab, this mic, and everybody else uses that same setup, and they sound the same. That was always the case with the pod. I noticed that. In here, that's not the case anymore because people won't know how I place the mic. And explaining that can be kind of difficult. And now let's double click the cab, and here we get some more settings. So we have a mic A. How many mics are those? I think those are 18. I'm too lazy to count right now. They don't sound too drastically different, but you do get different nuances, so you can make some good use of them. You can also get a second mic and place it however you want. Down here, a little mixer, also a rear mic that sounds very hollow and roaring. So you get a lot of low end with that one and a lot of chunk. And also a 45 degrees off axis mic. So you could technically use the fretman technique in here. Just take an SM57 mic, place it a little off from the center so it gets a bit darker and chunkier, and then fade in the 45 degree mic and you get a very, very rich tone. And it's pretty cool. You can also do some comb effects. So let's put both of those in here. Let's put this a bit off center. that's just so cool. Yeah. And what else do we have here? The second mic, you can also invert the phase if you put them at different distances and you want to get different comb effects or whatever. And then also ambience, so simulated room the cab is recorded in, but this only really makes sense to use when you actually put the mic at a good distance. If it's really close to the grill, then you won't hear the ambience at all. What's also pretty cool is the respire feature. Basically turn it on and you have a lot of low end and chunky low mids, which works great sorry, for rhythm guitars. Turn it off and it cleans up that whole lower range, and it works well for leads or for cleans on top of heavy guitars. Let's just check that out. Now, basically, it seems like they just put a filter in there, but the way I understand it, this actually changes the way the cabinet responds. So, I don't know the technical things behind it. Not important right now. And what's important is that it's usable. This is very usable. It makes sense. It's pretty cool. And also high pass, low pass filter. I don't really use those. I do that in the mix. But still nice feature. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the cabs. As you can see, you don't get any extra options for the amp that you don't need, but you get everything you do need, and that makes sense for the cabinet. And all of that has some actual impact on the sound. Really cool. And then with all the other effects, stomps and rack units, what have you, there's a TSC 808 emulation in here. There's the Proco Red emulation in here. My personal go-to stomp box that I also use in this tone, and pretty much all my other rhythm tones. All of this stuff just sounds very good. It's all very usable. It all makes sense the way it sounds, the way it behaves. Yeah, I can't walk you through all of that stuff. That would take way too much time now. And now lastly, let's come to the CPU usage. It's incredibly low. Like, wow. I have projects with a lot of instances of TH3 loaded up, some with 12 instances or perhaps even more. It really barely touches the CPU. It's incredible how clean they made this thing. So tracking in real time and monitoring with it in real time in bigger projects is absolutely no problem. It's so incredible. Overall, this whole thing is just so well thought out and executed, and I'm just genuinely amazed by it. And to be honest, I can't quite understand the hype for some other amp simulators that have some obvious flaws and bugs and that sound okay. And then this thing, that sounds better and it's just so well done nobody talks about. I guess that's marketing strategies for you. In any case, big shout out to Overloud. I think they made an amazing amp simulator here. Go check it out. The demo version goes for 2 weeks without any limitations. So it even saves you presets, which I absolutely hate from other demos, that they don't save the presets and you can't really do stuff. But here they actually thought it through. They made this from the point of view of the user. So well done. So that's it for my review. I hope I didn't let my fanboy hang out too much. I hope I stayed objective for the most part. And if you like this, then please by all means subscribe, click that like button, leave a comment, let me know what you think of this thing, and I will see you again.